people can start losing weight just by making better decisions.
Motivation is driven from the inside out.
Use flexibility as a tool. Rely on structure when it's helpful.
This is where we discuss the possibilities.
Hey guys, welcome to the Diet Doc Life Mastery podcast. I'm Dr. Kori Propst, Wellness Director and Vice President of the Diet Doc, and I'm here with Dr. Joe Klemczewski, founder of the Diet Doc. We are into a brand new week and kind of on the heels of what was a pretty awesome experience for the 2018 Owner Summit. Joe, you presented that first day, and your topic was the 5 dimensions of nutritional mastery. What are the 5 dimensions?
Well, one of the things I do at the beginning of every year is create what I hope to be something a little bit more compelling than the last year, or at least some new information, because as I travel around and speak, I know I'm going to be keying in on some of the foundational elements of nutrition, a lot of physiology, some biochemistry. My specialty, I think, what has kept me in the game for almost 25 years, is always making it very applicable and easy to understand. That's always been my goal, and it's certainly something I've been recognized for through editors and program owners and all of that. So it's a challenge to myself, is how can I create new, lively, fun, engaging content, but still be hitting on all the things that we just need to know that really don't change. So at the beginning of the year, that was, again, my challenge to myself, and I came up with the 5 dimensions of nutrition mastery. If there were 5 categories that we have to delve into and really understand, what would those be? So that's going to be a little bit broad categorically, but the first one is, I believe you have to have some kind of foundational premise as to how you understand and approach nutrition. So for me, that has evolved into structured flexibility, something we've talked about on our podcast before, something I talk about a lot. So that is the overarching element of how you're going to base every nutrition decision. I know you and I talked about foundationalism before, philosophically. And if my goal is structure and flexibility, taking the best of both worlds, I know I'm going to have something very solid to put my feet on when it comes to, how am I going to even design this diet? So, it may be best as a quick summary, because I know we have a lot of material on this already, just to go over a little bit what I'm doing with a particular client. So I have a very busy guy, travels a lot. He's overseas, was just in Africa. Now he's back in the States, and dieting is a little bit new to him. And so we really needed to start at the very beginning. And so for a client like that, I don't even want to throw numbers and formulas and macronutrients and all of this kind of difficult stuff, challenging stuff for somebody who's just not ready. So I started out with a simple meal plan. I calculated out the amount of macronutrients I thought would be right for him. But I told him, I said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to break this down into 3 elements. One is going to be very conceptual. So let's talk about having maybe 5 meals per day. This is what's going to work for you. A breakfast, a lunch, a dinner, a pre-workout, and a post-workout snack. That's a framework. To get a little bit more specific, let's try and get some protein into at least 4 of those meals, and here's why. Let's try and keep your carbohydrates to this kind of serving size, and here's why. So I'm really not giving him a lot of information to have to pull apart, but he soon was ready for that. Then he requested a phone call. And so yesterday we spent some time on the phone going over what macronutrients are. I gave him a little information about metabolic positioning, and he had this great aha moment. He's like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. But I truly don't think 2 weeks ago it would have. He needed to go through those structured steps first, where he's just following something, getting ready for those next steps. And now we can start adding some flexibility. So for me, the first dimension of nutrition mastery has to be anchoring onto something that you can say, this is the system or the principles I'm at least going to follow.
Okay, so with structure, you're giving someone a direction. Okay, you're grounding them in some piece of information so they can move forward. It comes back to, I thought of, we don't know what we don't know. So in this case, you're giving them a little bit to go on, establishing a little bit of knowledge that they can latch onto. And then inevitably, when they start putting that into place, they run into challenges or barriers, and then that allows you to then begin to work in some level of flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, and for me, like I said, this first premise is it's systemic. You have to have something that you can say, this is the box I will operate within.
Mm-hmm.
If I were a proponent of paleo or low fat or low carb or something else, that would be the framework. But I choose structured flexibility because I can basically teach nutrition from a normal scientific physiological perspective, also one that's very practical. That's very important. Even if there was something out there I thought had a slight edge in a health benefit or one avenue of health, if it can't be done, it can't be done. So I've always tried to bring the best of health and physiology into what I know people can be sustainable within their lives with.
Well, and I like what you've done with the 5 dimensions, because you are essentially creating a structure in that makes it easier for people to understand. So what's the next dimension?
Okay, the next dimension would be metabolic positioning, which is how I like to describe the movement toward using more body fat as an energy substrate. So just the process of helping somebody understand some of those biochemical terms like, gluconeogenesis, lipolysis, things like that, all these things that are happening, we need to move somebody to the point where their body is using more body fat as energy consistently, predictably, something they can control, and also very, very effectively. This is where the rubber meets the road in terms of research. Where are you going to lose the most body fat, but yet, number one, sustainably and comfortably, you can do this. And number two, with the least risk of losing lean body mass, creating massive hunger, creating binge eating. There are studies on all of this. There are studies that rank, from best to worst, what kind of diet can increase your chance of binge eating or just become the least compliance based. So I teach metabolic positioning, which we're not going to go over here. This will be a good topic for another day, but really just explains in simple terms how you get your body to the metabolic position that's the sweet spot of losing the most body fat the fastest in a very sustainable way. That would be my second dimension, which is what I did on the phone with my client yesterday. That's exactly what we did. I said, now that you've had a taste of structure, you feel comfortable, you're making some progress, we need to move you along to the next step. And I explained why I was giving him a macronutrient profile, because based on this metabolic positioning concept, we're going to get you here and you need to stay there. That's where all the efficiency is gained. Once you have worked through stored glycogen levels in your body, a lot of the stored carbohydrates, and you're using body fat as a consistently increased level of body fat, you want to stay there. If you go back and forth, you can see that even with the same amount of calories per week, you're just not losing very much body fat. So that's the importance of metabolic positioning.
What would be an example of back and forth? How does that happen?
So let's say somebody starts dieting, their meals are under control, and over the course of the first 2 or 3 days, they start losing weight. And a lot of that weight is the fact that we're using stored carbohydrates, stored glycogen from our liver, our muscle tissue, releasing some water, and we're moving that needle. We do start using more body fat instantly in a calorie deficit, but the percent of that body fat use increases as other energy substrates just become less available, meaning stored glycogen. Okay. So over the course of those 2 or 3 days, you move to that metabolic position where you're using more body fat as energy. But as soon as I trip up, so to speak, and have a bunch of extra carbohydrates or a high calorie day, the first thing I do is refill those glycogen or carbohydrate stores. And so now I'm right back to the beginning. where body fat use is a lot less efficient. So let's say, for example, you're dieting on 1,700 calories a day.
Mm-hmm.
Well, 1,700 calories on day one is not using very much body fat because I have all those stored carbs. Day 2, day 3, day 4, I start using higher percent of body fat. If I just stay there now, I'm using a maximum percent of body fat as energy. If I keep going back and forth, I'm diluting the amount of body fat I actually use. I'm essentially, going into debt, so to speak, with carbohydrates, where I have to pay those back first. I've increased those carbs. Now I've got to get rid of them before I can start using body fat.
Okay. So this, it sounds like, can really be impacted by, correct me if I'm wrong, the timing of our meals and how big each meal is that we're consuming, and when we choose to have those biggest meals throughout the day, and how our workouts are structured too.
Absolutely. For example, just based on what you just said, if you have just trained and you eat a meal, your body's metabolically going to use that meal much quicker. And so you're going to be in a calorie deficit again faster. So, you're going to use more carbohydrates, or more body fat, I should say, as energy after you use those carbohydrates. But if you're just kind of sitting around the afternoon at your desk and you're eating every hour and a half or two, and you're not giving yourself a chance to use those calories from your meals, you're never going to start accessing secondary energy, which would either be the stored carbs or body fat, depending on your metabolic position. So in short, all of that matters. And I know, this is something, like I said, we should probably spend an entire episode on exactly how this works, because there is some fun to be had within those details, because this is where you can make it a lot easier for yourself.
Well, I think about the clients, and yeah, we definitely should kind of go into more detail, but the clients who are nibbling throughout the day and taking bites of things, off their kids' plates, and even drinking artificially sweetened beverages throughout the day, and how all of those things can get in the way of being in that optimal position that you're talking about. So,
yeah, I would say, this is why this has become kind of the cornerstone of every book or edition of a book I've written. Whatever I'm working on, this is always a centerpiece, because it's just so important, is how your body works. No matter how many studies come out and look at this nuance or that, the absolute foundation of fat loss, if you look at any physiology textbook, is going to be, how you move into that state of greater fat usage. And then you can worry about all those details, how fast is too fast, what macronutrient profiles do you need, but it's incredibly important for sure.
Cool. Okay. So let's go to the third dimension.
All right, the third is your actual calorie prescriptive or macronutrient profile dimension. So how much food are you actually going to eat? And once again, I know we have tons and tons of content, so I don't want to dive into too much detail. I just want to talk about the broad theme of these 5 dimensions. But without that, obviously, you're not going to go anywhere. Yeah. I'll give you another couple little anecdotes just from working with clients this week. One of my clients, who's already lost about 30 pounds in just a quick, 2.5 months or so, had a week where he didn't lose quite as much. And he said, part of it was I was getting a little bit hungry, and I thought that this calorie level just seemed a little low. And so just by happenstance, traveling, working on the road, he ate about 500 calories more. And that brought him to a standstill, which was fine. He took a little self-induced diet break, but he said, down here at this level, I was getting hungry, so I ate this much, and now I feel much better. And basically, I said, you found your metabolic, not set point, but your maintenance level, just almost as a fluke. But now we know, how far down we have to go. We may have to buffer a little bit where you were to not have so much hunger. But, that's what happens when you can isolate how much food you actually need. You can be that precise. What we did have was causing a really good pace. Now, he said it may be almost difficult to sustain, so we can increase a little bit and know we're still online. So what I do, this goes all the way back to, of course, when I started doing nutrition consulting. and was working with clients, and I decided that I wanted to teach clients how to track protein, carbs, and fats. Before anybody was doing this, it wasn't even a thing. I just thought it made sense to give them an absolute budget so that we could give them maximum flexibility, maximum autonomy. And so to this day, again, another cornerstone of what we teach at the Diet Doc is tracking protein, carbs, and fats. So that's that macronutrient base. But as I mentioned in the first dimension, you can start with more structure and lead to that greater amount of flexibility. But it's always that balance between the two.
Okay. So is tracking one of the dimensions?
Well, it's certainly inside of dimension 3, which is macronutrients, your macronutrient profile tracking. So that entire scope of living is important. Yeah, you definitely have to know that.
That measurement piece. Okay, so what's the fourth?
Okay. What I want to do just real quickly, because I know we're not going to get to all of them, is basically cover 4 and 5 together.
Okay.
5, I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit, is the Diet Doc Mind Map, something you and I are developing together, which is basically the psychology of how you're going to understand food, yourself, and all of that stuff as we move into just greater understanding of how, as you said, Kori, I'll put it this way. If you have problems with food, with dieting, even some kind of disordered eating, it's never about the food, right?
Yeah.
So just in your understanding, very quickly, because I'd love your input for the listeners, how, when you look at all of the stuff you've done in self-determination theory, and then looking at how I wanted to craft a tool, inside of the mind map, why do you see that as important, or what's the whole concept that you want to bring this toward?
I think I would break it down into the fact that eating and health mastery and the pursuit of wellness goals in general come down to practical aspects. So that's deciding what to eat, tracking our food, learning how to eat out in a restaurant, and learning how to order off of a menu. And then there are the adaptive aspects, which include all of the emotional components that are combined in those decisions, and how those decisions and the goal that we're pursuing is impacted by our sense of competence and whether we feel effective in making those decisions or not, and how those decisions affect our relationships and how connected we feel within them, and then how much choice and volition we really feel in pursuing those goals. Because with the clients that I work with, oftentimes they'll say, like, they'll realize that it's not even their goal that they're pursuing, or there's something within the weight loss pursuit that they begin to recognize isn't associated necessarily with them. They didn't decide it, or they're feeling like they're directed or coerced in some way. But at a ground level, we make decisions often based on a sense of threat or fear or worry. And the decisions that we make in a situation like that aren't necessarily in line with what we've said is important to us. So we engage in very reactive behaviors, impulsive behaviors, and end up in this context emotionally eating or nibbling or binge eating. And that can operate on a continuum, obviously, but the goal in creating this mind map was to take an individual from where they are currently and the struggles that they're having, understanding how the brain itself is affected, and then what they can do with that on an emotional level, what questions they can ask themselves, and then how that moves into more behavior that is congruent with the goal itself. So we really wanted to make it as simple as possible for people to understand what's actually happening here and what can I do about it.
Yeah, my probably greatest need for this is almost because I've had to work through this. You as a psychologist have been my biggest influence. And so many of your heroes in the field and many of the concepts and theories that you subscribe to, you know, I've been able to look much deeper at, as well as some of the things on the periphery of my education. And I've always had that angle that as an outsider looking in, whatever I feel like I need to understand better or whatever has made something make more sense, you know, that's kind of a hot spot for me. So I know other clients are probably going to have those same questions. So the mind map for me was to take what's a little bit more of my grounding specialty, which is the organic brain physiology, neuroanatomy, and say, you know, here's how your brain processes these things in these different areas, much to, you know, the credit of Dan Siegel talking a lot, Dr. Dan Siegel, a psychiatrist, founder of interpersonal neurobiology. You know, his base is also very organic. Here's how we need to integrate the different parts of the brain. This, you know, parietal lobe over here, this neocortex, what's happening in the nucleus albicans, how do these things relate and communicate to each other, regardless of how we feel about it, which is more the limbic system. You know, that's happening on a very organic matter. So how do we flow that into our emotions, into how we think about it cerebrally? All of that has so much implication, as you said, to our relationship with food. So that's going to be a really cool thing that we do in the future, is explore that deeper, give more tools, describe it in our upcoming book. But then it's probably going to be something that we really fine tune over the next few years. But interestingly, when you look at these 5 dimensions that I picked out and wanted to describe in the 5 dimensions, they all have an element of, you know, structure toward flexibility, or how they fit with your personality, with the way you like to consciously interact with the world. So, you know, the first dimension is structure and flexibility, knowing we need both. Then you move into metabolic positioning. How much, you know, can we understand the physiology of what's happening? So it is an intellectual pursuit. Then you get into the fine details of macronutrients and tracking your food. And the 4th dimension that we kind of skipped over was meal planning. What is going to be the system you use to actually create meals? And this is where structure again meets flexibility. No matter how advanced you are and think that you can use a lot of flexibility, it's still very helpful to have some structure. So it really takes integration of all of those skills and strengths you might have cognitively to be able to grasp both of those things at the same time. We want structure in order so we can get, quote, perfect results, but we have to live in the real world. So we need to add flexibility to even our macronutrient base, even our meal planning base. So we're really kind of sandwiching those 3 more practical principles between structured flexibility and then the brain science of knowing how to use that. So for me, those are the 5 dimensions I really see as broad categories that we as nutrition clinicians should be looking to take our clients through.
Well, thanks, Joe. I really love how you brought it all together, in that we need all 4 or all 5, but it is going to be based on our personalities. I'll just use myself as an example. I hate following recipes, and yet I'm probably one of the most structured eaters you'll find. But I hate being put in a box and not being able to be flexible about the ingredients I'm adding to food. So each one of those, you know, does operate on a continuum, and based on our personalities, I think it's really important to take all of those seriously, but also recognize that we're going to have very individual needs that can be customized within one of those dimensions.
Definitely.
Awesome.
Perfect.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us again for the Diet Doc Life Mastery podcast. Please like, please share. We love your comments and feedback, and we will see you again soon.